Today we're doing something that I don't do very often, but I'm always excited when I get a chance to do it. I just want to pause in between series to talk to you about something that's really important. Matter of fact, from my point of view, it is mission critical to what we do as a church. So if you're here and you're new to this, you're trying to figure all this out, this will be you'll walk away with some helpful stuff, but this will be some good insight into what matters so much to us as a church. And behind the scenes, we call these, like one-off Sundays, we call them standalones. But one of the volunteers caught me today, and he said, "Are we having a one-hit wonder today?" And I like that name a lot better. I don't know why. So anyway, we're just going to talk about a single subject today that I think is really important and that I'm so excited to talk to you about. And I'll tell you why I'm so excited. A few weeks ago, I had a chance not to be on this stage and instead to be on that side of the building and to hang out all morning long with everything happening in our family ministry environments. I spent an entire service in Takeoff, which is our infant through pre-K kids, and then I spent part of that service in Highway 252, which is our K through 5th kids. And then the second service, I spent the entire morning with our 6th through 8th graders in transit. And I'm telling you, it's just phenomenal. I had so much fun over there. I know my kids, I'm a satisfied customer, okay? If you don't have kids, and you probably don't have any clue what happens on that side. But I have a 5th grader and a 3rd grader, about to be 6th and 4th, and they absolutely love what happens over there. And I hear so much about it every week, so it was great for me to be able to be over there and to see it. And what our staff is doing, it's just incredible. What our volunteers, and a lot of you volunteer over there, you are just phenomenal. You're absolutely phenomenal. As a matter of fact, if you have kids over there, when you go pick them up today, because I know we just get used to it being amazing every week, and we get used to our kids, they can't wait to go to church, and we just think that's normal, and we forget that's not really normal. So when you go pick your kids up today, you ought to just grab a staff person, a volunteer, whoever you run into, and just tell them thank you, because they are doing a phenomenal job over there. And they're changing the world. And the reason I know they're changing the world, well, there are two reasons. One, because anytime you invest in the next generation, you change the world. But I also know they're changing the world because that kind of investment changed my world when I was a kid. As I was over there, it brought to mind the names of 3 different guys that I want to tell you about. Their names are Benny, Jim, and Melvin. Benny, Jim, and Melvin. So let me just take a second and explain to you a little bit about what my childhood upbringing was like. And you have to know, my father's a pastor. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, okay? And let's just say our kids' environments didn't look like that over there, all right? It was small rooms. It was an upgrade when we went from concrete blocks to paneling. We were like, oh, we got a better room, So that was kind of the environment we grew up in. However, it didn't matter because of these 3 guys. So Benny was quite a character. Benny was my chain-smoking, airplane-flying, dirt-moving, hunting and fishing Sunday school teacher in the 5th and 6th grade. And if you thought that didn't sound like a Sunday school teacher, it didn't matter. This was, so anyway, Benny was one-of-a-kind kind of guy. So Benny had an excavation company, and he would put bids in to do state jobs all the time. And if you've ever been in that world, I assume it still works this way. I don't know. Back then, you had to actually get the bid by, I think it was Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. You had to have the bid in Frankfort in the office. And Benny got so tired of getting up early driving that Benny decided he was just going to go get his pilot's license and buy his own plane so he could fly to Frankfort. And then in his backyard, I'm not making this up, in his backyard, butting right up to his backyard was his cornfield. So he just cleared a spot in his cornfield and made an airstrip, a runway. And so Benny would just fly his plane right into his backyard and then fly back out and go to Frankfort. That was Benny. But every Sunday morning, 10 a.m., he would sit in a room with 10 of us, 10-year-olds, 5th and 6th grade boys, and he would be our Sunday school teacher. And sometimes, this is just the way it worked. I'm not saying this was awesome, but sometimes he would open up that Southern Baptist Sunday school curriculum, and he'd be like, hey, this is going to be interesting to talk about. And we'd talk about it. And sometimes he'd come in and he would just throw the book on the table and say, boys, it ain't any good this week. We're talking about something else. That was Benny, and so he'd just make up his own lesson, okay? So we just kind of do our own deal. My favorite memory of Benny, and our families were really tight, so I got to hang around Benny a whole lot. My favorite memory of him, though, was he decided, you knew, he's kind of rough around the edges, but you knew he loved God, and we boys knew he loved us. And he loved us so much that one time he decided it would be a good idea. He wanted to take all 10 of us, 5th and 6th grade boys, on an overnight squirrel hunting trip, okay? And so he did. Now, if you're thinking putting shotguns in the hands of 10-year-old boys is a terrible idea, it was the 80s. So we rode in the back of pickup trucks. We only had three wheels on our four-wheelers. Some of you remember that. It was a three-wheeler, not a four-wheeler. Safety was not a value in the 80s. So we really didn't care about that, all right? So anyway, he takes us on an overnight camping trip. And we didn't ask any questions, and all our parents just signed off because they probably didn't care if we came back or not. We were kind of an unruly group. So off we all went, right? And we get out in the middle of the woods, and Benny's version of camping with all of us, he drove 4 stakes in the ground in the corners and 1 in the middle, and then he had a big clear plastic tarp, and he just laid it over the stakes, and he said, "There's our tent, boys." We're like, okay. So, we had our sleeping bags, and we all just climbed under this plastic tarp, which worked great till about midnight when I woke up, and that tarp was 3 inches from my face because Noah's flood had arrived. And it was raining so hard, we spent the rest of the night in the cabs of all 10 of us, plus the adults. We were crammed in the cabs of 2 pickup trucks all night long. It's a whole nother discussion. But we got up the next morning, he fixed some scrambled eggs on the open fire or whatever, and then we went squirrel hunting. And so what he did, if you're wondering how to do this safely, I don't know, because that's not the way we did it. But what he did was he took all 10 of us boys, he started taking us out, and he'd stick one at this tree, and he'd say, "You can only look this way, and you can only shoot that way, okay? If you turn around and shoot that way, you may hit your buddy, so only shoot that way." He'd go down a little further, he'd put another kid at a tree and say, "You go that way, shoot any squirrel you want." So he places all the kids except me. And then Benny says, "Come on, Matt, we're gonna go find a spot to hunt." I'm like, all right. So I don't think Benny had ever seen what we saw that day, but we walk through the woods, and we come to a spot in the woods where I'm telling you, there was the biggest hickernut tree I've ever seen in my life. If any of you have ever been to Disney's Animal Kingdom, it was like the tree of life right there in front of us with dozens, there's a bunch of trees there, dozens and dozens and dozens of squirrels. I've never seen so many squirrels in all my life. And at that moment, we just both froze. And I looked over at Benny, and I looked in his eyes, and I realized this is no longer my hunt. So I said, "Okay, Benny, tell me what I need to do." And he said, "All right, I'm going to empty my gun, and as soon as my gun's empty, I'm going to hand it to you, and you give me your gun, and I'm going to empty yours while you're loading mine, and we're going to keep." I said, "Okay." Now, that's what we did. Benny started unloading, and he got to his gun. He said to me, "Hey, now when you load my gun, Matt, if you don't know anything about shotguns, 3 shells, okay, 3 shells. But there is a way to illegally modify a shotgun and have 5 shells instead of 3. And he said, "Matt, when you go to load my gun, you just go ahead and put 5 shells in. I promise it'll work." I was like, okay. So sure enough, he unloads his. I hand him my 410. He hands me his. I load it. We keep doing this. Until we are out of ammo. And if the game warden from 1985 happens to be here today, we did not go over the limit. Benny killed his limit, and Benny killed my limit. He killed them both, okay? That was Benny. But here's the thing we knew about him. For 2 years, he just hung out with us. He invested in us. He taught us all kinds of stuff. But we knew, at the end of the day, there's a guy who loves God. He's not perfect. There's a guy who loves God, and there's a guy who loves us. And then I graduated up to 7th grade, and in 7th and 8th grade, Jim was my Sunday school teacher. And again, we got a little bit of an improved room at that point. That's where we went to the paneling, so we really thought we were something. But Jim for 2 years, I won't spend a lot of time telling you stories about Jim, but Jim for 2 years, he taught us all kinds of stuff. He taught us, how to pray. He taught us how to figure out what God's direction is for different things. He taught us how to, ask God for wisdom. Jim talked to us about all the questions and doubts he had. And then said, "What questions and doubts do you have?" So we just talked about all this stuff, and he didn't always have answers, but that was okay. He'd try to find them. If he didn't have an answer, he'd just tell us. But for 2 years, he did this. And then at the end of my 8th grade year, my dad was moving to another church. And one of the things I was, most upset about is that I wasn't going to have Jim as a Sunday school teacher anymore. And he shows up. I was thinking about this last night because it's just the oddest thing. He shows up on my last Sunday, and he had bought, now remember, I'm an 8th grader. He had bought me a fancy pen and pencil set. That's the worst gift ever for an 8th grader. I'm like, but I still have it. It had my name engraved on it. I still have it. Matter of fact, I found it in my desk last night. I pulled it out. And apparently he spent some money on this thing because the ink still works. So that was a long time ago. But anyway, I just knew. Here's a guy who I can go and ask anything. Here's a guy who actually cares. And then we moved here to Murray, and during my high school years, a guy by the name of Melvin, if I told you exactly who he was, a lot of you would know, some of you may figure it out. A guy by the name of Melvin became my Sunday school teacher. And the thing about Melvin you need to know, even to this day, because he still lives here in Murray, even to this day, when somebody brings him up and I say, you know, he was my Sunday school teacher in high school, their jaw drops. It's like, we didn't even know, you know. Anyway, so Melvin was an interesting Sunday school teacher, and what I loved about him so much was he would come in, and he was a straight shooter. So when we high school boys were doing dumb stuff, he'd just call us out. When we were doing smart stuff, he'd tell us that's a good idea. And the best part about Sunday school for him, I mean, he tried to do the lesson, but the best part was the stories, because Melvin knew a lot. Melvin's the smartest guy I ever knew. And Melvin knew a lot of people who'd done a lot of dumb stuff, and he'd tell us all their stories. It was amazing. We were like, might have heard some of yours. I don't know. It's like we were on the edge of our seat every week. Tell us about another one of those dumb idiots, you know. So anyway, he would tell us all these stuff, and then he'd be like, boys, that's not how life works. Don't do that, you know. Here's how you follow God, and here's how life works. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about all three of these guys is because the thing that they had in common was not that they were perfect. These guys were far from perfect. They were a bit rough around the edges. These guys were not warm and fuzzy types. These guys, not a one of them, I guarantee you, ever looked at their wives and said, I just love working with kids and teenagers. They did not have that mentality at all. But all three of these guys, in spite of that, they felt this responsibility to invest in the next generation and to try to help us figure out how to love God and live life a little bit better. And you're sitting here partly because of the investment that they made in me. And I guarantee you, you know, if you were able, two of the three of them passed away now, but Benny and Jim have both died. But I guarantee you, if you had caught them, been able to talk to them and said, what do you think was going to happen with Matt when he grew up? They wouldn't predict this, you know. But they were willing to take a group of high school boys who, when we see each other to this day, that, you know, or fifth, sixth grade boys, when we see each other this day, all of us that were in those classes, we still talk about those guys. It's like there was a bond that was formed there because of the investment they were willing to make in us. And so I'm just going to tell you up front, if you hadn't figured it out, what I want to do today is, at the end, I want to invite you, I want to challenge you, I want to encourage you to figure out how you can give a little bit of your time to investing in the next generation, whether it's here in our church or whether it's somewhere in the community, wherever you live. But that is, outside of the investment you make in your family, I think it's the best investment you can make, because that really is how you change the world. You change the world by changing the next generation. Now, before I get there, I want to explain to you why I'm so confident that if you invest a little bit of time in the next generation, it makes such a big difference. About 2,000 years ago, first church has launched. You know, Jesus has died, risen. Over 500 people have seen him. It's been pretty remarkable. The first church is launched, and it's growing pretty quick. Jewish people, you may not know this, but Jewish people primarily made up the early church in the early days, which was astounding. We don't have time to talk about this, but it was just amazing. The reason it was so remarkable is because Jewish people, number one, did not believe a bodily resurrection like what Jesus did was even possible. They didn't believe that. That wasn't even on their radar. And two, they found it absolutely disdainful to call any human being a god. And yet here they were, because, well, so many people had seen Jesus alive, and when a man predicts his own death and resurrection and pulls it off, it changes what you believe and how you approach things. And so these Jews had thrown away all of that stuff that was a part of, you know, their history, and had said, nope, this one's legit. This one's legit. But the early church wasn't made up of Jews who were all the same. The early church was made up of two different kinds of Jews: the Hebraic Jews and the Hellenistic Jews. Now, let me see if I can explain this. So Hebraic Jews were Jews who had maintained the traditional Jewish lifestyle, the traditional Jewish religious traditions. They're the ones who were there in Israel, and they were going to the temple, you know, and they've been doing all of that stuff. So originally, when the early church launched, it was made up largely of Hebraic Jews. But word began to spread about the resurrection. Word began to spread about, you know, what Jesus had done. And so Jews who didn't live in Jerusalem, Hellenistic Jews were Jews who had, you know, they were still Jewish. They still held on to the Jewish religious traditions, but they had also adopted the lifestyle and the language of the Greeks. And they were trying to, you know, hold on to both worlds at once, because they were living in a Greek world outside of Israel. So these Hellenistic Jews, word begins to spread and they begin to hear. And they move back to Jerusalem. They come back because they want to talk to these eyewitnesses for themselves. And they hear about what happened, Jesus' resurrection. They start to understand the message. They see what God's doing. They become a part of the early church. And so the early church is just growing really, really fast. But you almost have two different kinds, and you can imagine this, right? The Hebraic Jews are like, oh, we're the pure Jews, we're the ones who we haven't compromised at all. And you Hellenistic Jews, you have. But here they are now, all in the church, all following the same Jesus. And the church is growing so fast that the leaders of the church, they're having a hard time keeping up. So Luke, who knew many of these leaders, he records for us an interesting problem, if you will, that resulted from all of these Jews showing up and becoming a part of the early church there in the early days. Here's what he tells us. He says, in those days when the number of disciples was increasing, and this was primarily in Jerusalem still, the Hellenistic Jews among them complained against the Hebraic Jews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So the early church was doing exactly what a church ought to do. The early church was focused on spreading the message of Jesus, more specifically, making sure everyone knew about the resurrection of Jesus and what that meant for them. And the early church was being for their community, in this case, Jerusalem. They were trying to take care of the needs of the people in their own community. And so what would happen is the Jews there, they were a part of the early church, they would be extraordinarily generous. If you read Acts, which is an account of the history of the early church, just look for all the generosity. I mean, it was incredible. They were so generous to give. And then Peter, you've heard of Peter and Andrew and James and John and another James, because there were a lot of Jameses, and Thomas and Matthew, all those guys. So they're taking the money, they're going to buy food, and the widows were some of the most at-risk people in Jerusalem at the time. So they would buy food, and every single day they would deliver food to all of the widows, okay, trying to take care of it. The problem is, as these Hellenistic Jews are moving into Jerusalem, the church is getting so big, they just can't keep up with all the widows. And it creates a little bit of a problem, right? Peter and his buddies can't figure out how to get to everybody every single day. And so they come up with a plan. Luke tells us the plan is this. He says, so the 12 gathered all the disciples together, the other leaders there in the church, and said, all right, it wouldn't be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word of God in order to wait on tables, which sounds really insensitive, doesn't it? But they're not saying, oh, this is beneath us. They're just saying, you know what? We realize we are uniquely gifted and qualified to do something nobody else can do. We spent 3 years with Jesus. We heard all of his teachings. We are uniquely gifted and qualified to share with everybody what Jesus taught. But we can't do it because we're spending all of our time waiting on tables and delivering food. So we got to figure out how to solve this problem. And here was their solution. They said, brothers and sisters, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. And then they go and say, we'll turn this responsibility, because they knew it was a big deal. We'll turn this responsibility over to them. We'll give our attention to prayer and the ministry of the word. And then Luke reports that this proposal pleased the whole group. So this is what they do. They go find, this was really smart, they go find 7, not just Jewish men, they find 7 Hellenistic Jewish men. And they say, all right, we want you guys to take over the meals on wheels. It was more like food on foot, anyway. So we want you guys to take over this everyday delivery. Y'all got to organize the food. Y'all got to make sure it gets to all the people. Y'all got to run this, this ministry. Y'all got to take care of this, because we got to teach. We got to pray. We got to make sure everybody knows what Jesus taught. And everybody's like, okay, they're all in. They start doing it. Now, before I read what Luke writes next, Luke is about to tell us what the result of this plan was, how it turned out. But I want you to imagine, and I want you to guess in your mind what you think Luke says. It's going, okay, we got 7 guys and kind of handed it off and delegated this, and they started running this deal. How do you think Luke would describe what happened as a result of this? I would expect Luke to write, hopefully, and it worked, and all the widows were cared for and they had food and nobody starved, or, everybody was happy and nobody fell through the cracks. And maybe that happened. We assume that happened. It appears that happened, but that is actually not what Luke writes about. This is fascinating to me. Look at what he writes next. He says, so the word of God spread. Whoa, wait a minute. We're talking about delivering some food to some widows every day. What in the world does that have to do with the word of God spreading? Luke says, oh, actually, there's a huge connection between these two. The number of disciples in Jerusalem, he says, it just increased even more rapidly. And a large number of priests became obedient to the faith. To which we go, well, how are these two things possibly connected? How do 7 guys take over running a deal where food gets delivered to widows every day, and somehow more people start following Jesus? What does that have to do with each other? And the simple answer is this. The simple answer is they did what needed to be done in that moment to fuel the movement that was the early church. That's all they did. And this is where you can't explain it apart from God stepped in. But they said, we're going to take care of delivering some food. And God said, thanks for taking care of them. Now I'm going to use it to help more people follow Jesus. And the church grew rapidly. Now, I know this works. I can't explain why this works, but I know this works because for 17 years now, I have watched so many of you change diapers, you park cars, you greet people, you make coffee, you run production equipment, you do all kinds of, mow the grass now and, spray weeds. You do all kinds of stuff, which seemingly has no connection. All kinds of stuff which you're like, it just doesn't feel like that big of a thing. It feels like a really little thing. And it is, but I've watched for 17 years as a group of people have chosen to do little things and God has turned them into big things. They've done little things and somehow those little things, changing diaper, mowing grass, spraying weeds, caring for kids, whatever it is, has turned into more and more people experiencing God's grace in a personal way. And for all of you who do that, and there are, last I looked, 316 of you who volunteer here on a regular basis, I just want to pause and say thank you. And I want to say thank you because, you're doing what needs to be done in the moment, and God's going, I'm going to take that. And he's the only one who can do this. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to use it to fuel my movement. I'm going to use it to help introduce people to my grace. Y'all are phenomenal. You're phenomenal. People ask me all the time, about our volunteers. And they ask me, how do you have this is other pastors. They're like, how do you have such a small staff at your church? And I'm like, because our volunteers actually run everything. Don't tell them. They might fire me because I'm not needed really. They just, we're a volunteer-driven organization. They take care of it all. But we've watched God use that year after year after year after year. So thank you. Now, this is where the sales pitch comes in, okay? So I'm going to tell you when I start it, and I'm going to tell you when I stop it, all right? Fair enough. So for the rest of you who call Journey home, and you're not engaged here yet, you're not involved here yet, you're not given a little bit of time to make an impact in somebody else's life, I want to invite you today to do that. I want to invite you today to do what those 316 people do. And I'll be upfront about what it is. I want to ask you to inconvenience yourself for something greater than yourself. Because when you serve, whether it's at church, a nonprofit, helping a neighbor out, doesn't matter, you're inconveniencing yourself. But I want to ask you to do it for something greater than yourself. So, the last 24 months have been pretty interesting. We have doubled in size in 24 months. So all the people who said, COVID's killing the churches, well, it didn't kill ours. We tried. We didn't meet for a whole year. We just tested it. We couldn't kill it, right? 24 months, we've doubled in size. This year alone, we're up 20% over last year in attendance. Now, the reason I tell you that's not because the numbers matter to me, other than this. What that has done is it has created this unique opportunity we have as a church to have an impact in the lives of people, especially in the lives of the next generation. Faster than we expected, we're already filling up all the space over there. Faster than we expected, we're having more preschoolers, elementary kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students who we're able to influence, who we're able to impact, who we're able to serve. And it's extraordinary. But one of the things that we know is we're not slowing down any. And so as many people as we have now that we're trying to serve, come this fall, we're going to have even more. And come next spring, we're going to have even more. And if God continues, as long as we keep doing our part, God seems to keep doing his part. And so you may think 316 volunteers here, good grief, that's a huge number. Well, it is. But it's a really small number in comparison to the number of lives that we have an opportunity to impact and the number of lives that we're trying to serve every single week. And so if you call Journey your home and you're not engaged here, involved here, serving here, I want to ask you to explore it. That's all I'm asking. I just want to ask you to explore it. I want to ask you to consider moving from being a spectator to a participator. Now, those who've been around here a long time, if you don't believe me, you can ask them. They will vouch for this. Since we've opened up this building, I have been really nice. And what I mean by that is, I've let you come, I've let you sit, I've let you figure out, do we like this church? How is this? I've been really nice. But I've let you stay comfortable as long as you can stay comfortable, all right? Because here's the deal. We didn't build this, and we don't create all of this so we can come in here and just have a great experience and be a nice consumer and walk away feeling good about ourselves. This is not a meeting place where we come and get something for ourselves and walk out. That's not primarily what this is about. I hope that happens. But this is a movement that's been given what I think is the most important mission in the world. And it's our job to do everything we can to make it easy and simple for people to connect with God. And you know what the number one thing is right now that's making it difficult for us to keep it simple for people to connect with God, especially the next generation? It's just we need more of you helping out. That's it. We get more of you helping out, we're going to be able to serve more kids, more students, more adults. So, when you walked in today, there was a card on your seat. And that card was there, as you probably knew what was coming, because we wanted to let you see some of the different, not all of them, but some of the different opportunities you have to get involved here, okay? But I am not asking you today to commit to getting involved. I'm asking you for one simple commitment, and that is to participate over the summer in a Serve Now experience that we do. If you fill this card out, or you go to our app, or you scan the QR code, or you scan that QR code. I mean, it all gets you to the same place. And you let us know you're interested in getting involved. All we're asking from you, we're going to help you find a time where you can attend a Serve Now during one of the services on a Sunday. We're going to take you to the area you're interested in. If you don't know, we'll take you to a bunch of them and let you see. We're going to show you all the different volunteer roles. And we're going to try to help you find something you would really love to do with people you would like to do it with, and we're just going to let you test it. That's it. That's all we're asking. So if you've wondered, if you've been thinking, maybe I should, this is the time to do it. Because come fall, we're going to need you. We're going to need you really bad. So if you're wondering, well, where do you need me? Let me show you exactly where we need you. We need at least 12 of you to serve in our infant through pre-K area. 25 more people to serve in our K through 5th because that thing is packed. It is packed over there. We need 10 more of you to serve in transit, which is our 6th through 8th grade experience. We need 30 of you to serve in Inside Out on Wednesday nights, which is our 9th through 12th. And we need 30 of you come fall to serve in Journey nights, which is our Tuesday night college experience. It's going to go weekly this fall. Now, the reason these two numbers are so big is because we're rolling out brand new things for both of these age groups that's going to be 3 steps beyond what we've ever done before, but we need a lot of volunteers to pull it off. So, all I want you to do is do what Benny was willing to do, what Jim was willing to do, what Melvin was willing to do. Give a little bit of your time to invest in the next generation. Now, if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible with kids. That's fine. You can serve on this side, okay? You can help indirectly. And there are opportunities on here for you to do that. But we need about 100 of you just to get involved in our family ministries over the next 2 to 3 months. And here's what I know. There are plenty of you out there to make that happen. Plenty of you. So if you've never done it, I want to invite you to do it. Here's the thing. Sales pitch is over, okay? Sales pitch is over. Here's the thing. You have extraordinary potential to make a lifelong impact in somebody else's life. And you don't see yourself that way, but I do. And you don't think you're capable of doing it, but I know you're capable of doing it. I know what God will do through you, and I know the way He will use you. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be all warm and fuzzy. You don't have to even love kids. You just have to be able to be willing and be available, like Benny was, like Jim was, like Melvin was. You have the ability to one day be a part of somebody's story. I'm asking you to get involved because one day down the road, I want some preschooler or elementary or middle or high school kid or college student or 20-something who's come here. I want you to be their name they tell when they talk about somebody who made a difference in their life at this critical stage of life they're at. And you can be that. You don't have to know all about the Bible. You have to be available and willing for God to use you. You got to give a little bit of your time, and your little bit of time will make a lifetime of difference in them. And I'll let you in on a little secret. It will make a world of difference in you too. You will walk away going, I think I got more out of that than I gave. Because that's just how it works when you partner with God in what he's trying to do. So, scan that QR code, fill out that card, drop it in a giving box. As soon as you exit the doors, it's right there on your left. Drop it in a giving box. Just let us know you're interested and you'll come to Serve Now. You'll get to see what it looks like. We have tons of rows. You don't have to work directly with kids over there. There's production rows. There's setting out food rows. There's, all kinds of stuff. But be willing to give a little bit of your time. Because you know what movements do? This is profound. Are you ready? Movements move. They don't come sit in a seat and listen to a guy like me speak and then go home. Movements move. And if all you ever decide to do here is come sit in a seat and listen to me and then leave, eventually you will get bored. And eventually you will get tired. And eventually you will decide, I don't know what I'm getting anything out of this. And you're not. Because you're taking in and you're never giving back. You're taking in, you're never giving back. You need to move from a consumer to a participator in what God is doing around here. You find a way. If it's not here, find a way somewhere to invest a little bit of your time in the next generation so that one day you'll be the name that they talk about, just like Benny, Jim, and Melvin are for me. Let's pray together. Father, it's easy just to sit and listen. It's easy just to take and consume. But we don't grow that way. And we don't make any change that way. It takes a lot of action. So thank you for what you're doing here. We care so much about the students, the kids on the other side of this building, about their parents and their friends who are walking in with them every week. God, would you help us to continue to steward well this opportunity you're giving us to make a lifelong difference in so many of their lives. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.